This is the story of Lake Biwa. Lake Biwa, formed some 4 million years ago, is located in the west-central part of Japan. The environment was serene, with many small attached lakes around the main lake. The shoreline and the surrounding wetlands were covered with natural vegetation such as reed beds, providing for natural purification capacity and serving for fish breeding grounds. People settled around the lake some 20,000 years ago. The water from the lake and inflowing rivers served for drinking, cooking, and washing, as well as for harvesting fish and shellfish. With time, paddy fields were introduced and settlements began to form around the lake. Blessed with abundant resources for daily life, the population around the lake continued to increase. The paddy fields were small and depended on rainwater. The surrounding mountain ranges were typically covered with deciduous broadleaf trees, but there were also mountain ranges notably covered with Japanese cedar and cypress trees. The Tanakami mountain range, in the southernmost part of the lake basin, is one such example, known to have been extensively covered with prime quality cypress trees. In as early as the 7th through 8th century, the Tanakami mountain cypress trees were cut down to be shipped on the rivers via the cedar rafts, all the way to the ancient capital of Nara, for use mainly as temple and shrine pillars. Among the most famous of such examples are the pillars for constructing the housing structure for the giant Buddha in Nara. Those mountain ranges were gradually denuded over the next centuries due to the continuing deforestation for constructing wooden buildings and for household uses. The geological characteristics of these mountain ranges led to extensive soil erosion, with little or no self-recovery having taken place over the course of succeeding centuries, up to the late 19th century, when the human interventions with introduced technology from overseas finally led to successful reforestation. Settlements around the lake continued to grow and trade began. The people started to transport goods on the lake, initially using wooden rafts, and later on using small boats that were manually rowed. As trade expanded, the importance of the lake as a means of transport grew more and more. Port towns developed, and the lake became an important transportation route for trade, linking regions on the west and north of the lake. Rice was transported across the lake for payment of tax to the rulers. With time, lake transportation was further developed, and many boats for transporting goods were active on the lake. Airy method of catching fish developed, and the fish catch from the lake and inflowing rivers increased. The fishery in the lake continued to thrive. Paddy fields became large in scale, and rainwater alone was not enough, especially in the dry season. Conflicts over water use often occurred among neighboring villages, sometimes resulting in casualties. Although negotiations were held, securing water remained an important and difficult issue. The conflicts over water use lasted for centuries, and the society developed mechanisms through which these conflicts were managed and resolved. Population continued to increase around the land and within the lake basin. Forests were actively felled not only as a source of construction materials, but also as a source of firewood fuel. Deforestation continued, and many mountains in the southern region were left bare. This led to loss of water retention and purification function of forests in this area. As a result, the flooding problem became more severe. Reforestation of Mount Tanakami, which had long been denuded, began in late 19th century, mainly for reducing flooding frequency for the downstream region, with technologies introduced by a Dutch engineer. It has been a painfully slow and gradual process, requiring manual labor, involving the extensive participation of the Tanakami community for more than a century. In the meantime, an all-out national effort for replacing the deciduous forests to cedar and cypress trees for producing lumbers for housing construction purposes began in the mid-20th century. However, by the mid-1980s, it became clear that the economics of lumber production out of the afforested cedar and cypress trees didn't make economic sense, as cheaper and better tropical hardwood lumbers became available by importation from southeastern Asian countries. Essentially, the cedar and cypress lands are left idle, with frail and short-rooted cedar and cypress trees barely holding on to the steep mountain slopes. Renewed effort for participatory forest management is underway in the Lake Biwa watershed. People living around the lake suffered from flooding for a very long time. The practical solution was to dredge the only single outflowing river in order to increase the discharge capacity. However, for a long time, dredging of the outflowing river was not possible due to downstream flooding concerns and military reasons. It was only after a very severe flood in 1896, in which some communities around the lake were kept in water for more than half a year, that dredging of the outflowing river was done, and also a manually operated weir was installed to control floods. To meet the growing demand for rice, paddy fields were expanded, and water was systematically secured from dams and reservoirs. Hence, some of the historic water use conflicts were addressed. Railway and road networks were developed, and the lake lost its importance for transportation of goods. Eventually, lake transportation for recreation took prominence, with sightseeing boats and yachts becoming popular. After the end of the Second World War in 1945, the country entered a period of unprecedented, rapid economic growth. The economy of the lake region grew, and there was a rapid conversion of land use from agriculture and forestry to settlement and industry. Factories were established around the lake, and population continued to increase. Management of human waste in the growing population centers also became an important issue. In some high-density population centers, human waste was collected and used as agricultural manure. In other urban areas, untreated sewage was discharged into the lake, polluting it. Even toxic pollution originating from untreated or inadequately treated industrial wastewater became a controversial issue in the lake basin. As socioeconomic development in the lake region continued, the lake began to show signs that it was reaching its limits. First, a musty odor was detected in the downstream tap waters whose sources were traced back as the lake water. Then, pollution in some areas of the lake led to some bathing resorts being closed. Finally, a water bloom occurred in the lake in 1977 for the very first time, and the surface of the lake turned red. It became apparent that the lake had become eutrophic because of increased outputs of nutrients, some coming from the daily lives of the residents, such as use of phosphorus-containing detergents. Aggrieved by this finding, local housewives around the lake campaigned against the use of detergents and instead advocated for the use of soap through what is famously called the soap movement. This soap movement led to the enactment of a local eutrophication control ordinance in 1980, which banned the sale and use of phosphorus-containing detergents in the lake area. The eutrophication control ordinance had major impacts on management of water quality, not only in the local lake region, but also nationally. What was unique about the soap movement was the symbolism and spirit associated with it. Thanks to the movement, a strong partnership between the local government and citizens was established. Reclamation of attached lakes and destruction of the natural shoreline due to construction on the lake shore led to loss of breeding habitats for fish. Fish catches in the lake declined because of the deterioration of the habitat and pollution. Currently, painful efforts are being made to recover the natural shoreline in some areas. This story illustrates human-nature interactions in the lake basin over a very long time. Over centuries, people living around the lake have developed a strong attachment to the lake because they consider the lake as their most important natural resource. The lake is their symbol, as reflected in local traditions and festivals. Thus, the cultural and spiritual values of the lake cannot be ignored. A long history of human-nature interactions has created indigenous institutions and management practices unique to the lake. It is important that not only the administration, but all stakeholders, including residents and the business sector, be involved in the management of the lake. Lake basin management requires gradual, incremental, and long-term collaboration of all stakeholders, with inputs from various sectors of the basin society. Such an approach is called Integrated Lake Basin Management, or ILBM, and will be introduced separately, using Lake Biwa as well as other lakes in the world as case examples.